On the morning his stepfather changed the locks, Wade Kessler was 19 years old. With $60 in his pocket, a duffel bag over his shoulder, and nowhere to sleep, he did not go to a shelter. He drove to a county surplus auction and spent 15 of those dollars on the one lot nobody else would touch. A rusted airplane hangar at the end of a closed airstrip. Its roof half caved in, its doors chained shut for years. People laughed when the gavel came down. But inside, under a tarp gone stiff with dust, sat an old yellow airplane that no one had flown in more than 10 years. And when Wade climbed into the cracked seat of that cockpit just to get out of the wind, his hand closed around something the plane's owner had hidden behind the panel, waiting all this time for whoever finally came looking. The locks had been changed while he was still asleep in the bed of his truck. He found that out a little after 6 in the morning. He walked up the gravel drive to the house he had lived in since he was 8, put his key in the side door, and felt it stop halfway. He jiggled it. The front door would not turn either. He tried the door off the garage, the one that never locked because the deadbolt had been broken for years, and found it new too, brass and still shiny, with a curl of sawdust sitting on the concrete step where somebody had drilled it in a hurry. Wade stood in the cold longer than made sense. His breath came out in clouds. Somewhere behind the kitchen curtain, a light was on. He knocked. He knew who would come. And he was right. His stepfather opened the inside door, but not the storm door, so there was still a wall of glass between them, smudged where the dog used to press its nose before the dog died. "You already know," Garrett said. "Know what?" Register was short again Friday. 200, give or take. Garrett folded his arms. He was a big man gone soft in the middle, with a face that had settled into a permanent squint from a lifetime of looking at engines under bad light. "I told you last time was the last time. I didn't take anything from the shop." Wade kept his voice level because raising it had never once worked. "You know I didn't. You count that drawer 3 times a day. I know the drawer's short, and I know who closed Friday." Behind him, in the hallway, Wade's mother stood with a coffee mug she was not drinking from. She had her robe cinched tight and her hair still flat from the pillow, and she did not come to the door. That was the part Wade would keep turning over for a long time afterward. She did not come to the door. She looked at him through 2 panes of glass and a screen, and she looked away. "Dana," Garrett said, without turning around, "go on back in. It's cold." She went. "There's a bag on the step," Garrett said. "Your mother packed it. Some of it's yours." He said it like he was doing Wade a kindness. Maybe in his own arithmetic he was. "You're a grown man now. 19 today, aren't you? Time you figured your own life out instead of living off ours." It was his birthday. Wade had forgotten, and now he could not unremember it. He did not argue. Arguing was a door that opened onto nothing. He picked up the duffel his mother had filled with maybe a third of what he owned, and he walked back down the drive and he heard the inside door close before he reached the truck. Not slammed. Just closed, soft and final, and he heard the bolt turn behind it. He sat behind the wheel for a while with the engine off. The heater had died back in November, and he had never had the $40 to fix the blower motor, so the cab was the same temperature as the yard. He counted the money in his wallet twice. $60. A gas station receipt. His father's multi-tool, the real one, the Kessler one, worn smooth on the pliers from a man who had been dead 11 years and whose garage was the last place Wade could remember feeling like he belonged to somebody. He had one plan, and it was a bad one. Taped inside the front window of the diner out on a county road, next to the flyers for a gun show and a lost healer, there was a yellow sheet he had read 3 times that week. County surplus auction. Saturday, 9 o'clock. Structures. Vehicles equipment. Contents. All items sold as is, where is. He had wanted something off that sheet he knew he could not afford. A camper shell, maybe. A beat trailer. An old panel van he could make a bed in. Something to live inside that was not a truck with no heat. It was Saturday. It was almost 9. The auction was held in a gravel lot behind a county maintenance barn, and by the time Wade got there, 40 or 50 people stood around in barn coats with paper numbers stapled to sticks. He almost turned around. Everybody there seemed to know everybody else, and they had trailers and cattle and the easy look of people who owned things. He found a spot at the back, near a stack of guardrail that smelled like rust and old rain, and he kept his hands in his pockets. The auctioneer worked fast. A road grader with a cracked block, 3 pallets of culvert pipe, a repossessed side-by-side that drew a knot of men who bid it up past $4,000 in under a minute. Wade watched the numbers climb and felt the $60 in his wallet turn into nothing. Then the auctioneer looked down at his clipboard, and his voice changed, went a little flat, like he was already bored of the next thing. "All right, lot 19. This here's the old aircraft hangar, And contents out at the Bishop Creek Field, north end of the county. Structures condemned, roof's gone on one side, comes with whatever's left inside it, which I'm told is not much. Sits on county ground, so the lease transfers with it, such as it is. Back taxes are forgiven as part of the sale. He paused. Been on this list at every sale for a while now, folks. Nobody's bought it yet. Who'll start me at 100? Nobody moved. A man near the front laughed and said something to the man beside him, and they both grinned. 100. 50. Somebody give me 50 for a piece of history. More quiet, a woman said loud enough to carry, give you 50 to haul it off, and got her laugh. The auctioneer sighed. I'll take any offer, and I mean any, somebody. This is a real deed, folks, real building. You could run cattle in it if the roof didn't leak. Wade did not decide to raise his hand. His hand went up on its own, before he could think better of it. $15, he said. The whole lot turned to look at him. He felt the heat come up his neck. The man who had laughed looked him up and down, took in the duffel bag Wade had not wanted to leave in the unlocked truck, took in the fact that he was 19 and alone and clearly not there for cattle, and the man looked him over and smiled, and it was not a kind smile. $15 from the young man in the back, the auctioneer said, and there was a kindness in how quick he said it, like he wanted to get it done before anybody made it worse. 15 going once, twice. The gavel was just a wooden mallet he tapped on a fence post. He tapped it. Sold for 15. To number... What's your number, son? Wade did not have a number. He had not registered. A woman at the folding table waved him over and took his name and $13 more than he wanted to spend, and gave him a carbon copy receipt and a padlock key on a loop of dirty twine and a single sheet of paper that was, apparently, the deed to a building. Congratulations, she said, not unkindly. You want directions? I know Bishop Creek, Wade said, which was half true. She looked at him another second, and her face went soft. Some of the older women in town looked at him like that, like they could tell. There's a water spigot out there still works, last I knew, she said quietly. On the north wall, just so you know. He did not understand until later why she told him that. Then he understood it completely. The Bishop Creek field was 11 miles north of town, on a road that gave up being paved after the last farm. Wade drove it with the windows cracked because the defrost did not work either, wiping the glass with his sleeve. He passed a grain bin, a dead center pivot sprinkler standing in a bare field like the skeleton of something, and then a chain-link gate hanging open on one hinge with a metal sign wired to it. The sign said the airfield was closed by order of the county. Somebody had zip-tied a newer notice over the old one, a white sheet in a plastic sleeve, but Wade did not stop to read it. He would wish later that he had. The runway was still there, sort of. A strip of old concrete running off into the grass, cracked into 1,000 plates with weeds standing up through every seam. And at the north end sat the hangar. It was bigger than he had pictured, and worse. A long steel building with a curved roof, the kind they built after the war, its skin gone the brown-orange of a dropped wrench left out in the rain. The whole east side of the roof had folded inward where a tree had come down on it, and the tree was still there, gray and dead, growing out of the building like a bone through skin. The big sliding doors on the front were chained shut, the chain looped through 2 handles and locked with a padlock the size of Wade's fist. He tried his key. It did not fit that lock. Of course it did not. But around the side, where the water spigot was exactly where the woman had said, there was a smaller door, a man door, and that padlock matched his key. The hasp was so rusted he had to hit it twice with the flat of his father's multi-tool before it let go. The door screamed on its hinges. Wade stepped inside, out of the wind, into the dark, and stood still while his eyes adjusted. Light came down in a hard column through the hole in the roof, full of dust, and everything else was shadow. The place smelled like cold iron and old birds and something underneath that, oil and dry rot and the ghost of coffee. There were shelves along one wall, a workbench, coffee cans of hardware furred with rust. A calendar hung by the bench, curled and faded, still turned to a month a dozen years gone. And in the middle of the floor, under the good part of the roof where the rain had never reached, sat a shape the size of a small car under a canvas tarp. The tarp had gone stiff and gray, humped over something with a long nose and a high tail. Wade knew what it was before he touched it. He had just not let himself believe there would still be a plane inside a building called a hangar. That felt like too much to hope for on a day that had started with a locked door. He pulled the tarp back, and the dust came off it in a slow gray wave that hung in the light. It was an old airplane, small, a 2-seater with fabric wings and a single propeller, and fat tires gone flat with age. It had been yellow once, a deep buttery yellow, though a decade of dust had turned it the color of a dead field. On the cowling, up near the nose, someone had painted a name in careful script, and time had eaten most of it, but Wade could still make out 4 letters. J-U-N, and the beginning of an E. Junie, maybe. A name for a person, not a machine. He walked all the way around it. The fabric on one wing had split, and he could see the wooden ribs inside, pale and dry. A bird had built a nest on top of a tire, but the body of the thing was straight and whole, and when Wade put his hand flat on the cool metal of the cowl, he had the strange feeling that he was touching an animal that was only sleeping. It got dark early that time of year. Wade ate half a gas station sandwich he had bought 2 days before, and drank water straight from the spigot, cupping it in his hands, and it tasted like iron and cold. He thought about sleeping in the truck out of habit, and then he thought, for the first time in his life, that he had somewhere else. He had a building, it was condemned, and it had a dead tree growing through the roof. But it was his, and the wind could not get to the middle of it. The plane had a door, a little metal door on the side, latched but not locked, and when Wade worked it open, the whole airframe rocked gently on its flat tires. Inside were 2 seats, one behind the other, the leather cracked and split and losing its stuffing, and a wheel and a bank of round instruments with glass gone yellow. It smelled stronger in there. Oil and leather and the same smell of old coffee, closer now, like the man who used to sit here had only stepped out. Wade climbed into the front seat. It fit him. His hands found the wheel without deciding to. Through the dusty windscreen, he could see the column of gray evening light coming down through the broken roof, and for a minute he just sat there, out of the wind, out of the cold, out of the reach of everybody who had ever looked at him through a pane of glass and looked away. That was when his hand, feeling along the side of the seat for something to lean on, found the pocket. It was a canvas sleeve stitched to the cockpit wall beside his knee, a pocket meant for maps. There was something heavy in it. He worked it out into the last of the light. A cigar tin, the paint worn off the lid, and behind it, wedged deep, a book bound in cracked black leather, swollen with damp and age, and stuffed with loose papers until it was thick as a brick. Wade opened the tin first. Inside were a few things a man keeps. A brass button, a woman's ring, thin and plain, a folded newspaper clipping too dark to read in the failing light, and a key, smaller than his hangar key, with a paper tag gone soft as cloth. He set the tin on his knee and opened the book. It was a logbook. He knew that much from the columns, the dates, the neat block printing that filled line after line after line, page after page, going back and back through years. Every row was a flight. Date, aircraft, hours, and then a space for remarks, and it was the remarks that made Wade stop breathing for a second in that cold, cracked seat. Most men, he would learn, wrote nothing in that space, or wrote about the weather. This man had written things like a diary. Wade tilted the page into the dying light and read the first line his eye landed on, in a hand steady as a printed page. Flew the Dvorak boy to Kearney. Appendix. Weather bad, ceiling 300, went anyway. He made it, no charge. And under it, another. And under that, another, hundreds of them, thousands, stacked into a book so thick a man could barely close it, kept for half a century and then wrapped in a tarp and left in the dark for whoever came. On the last written page, below the final flight, the same steady hand had left 3 lines that were not about any flight at all. Wade read them by holding his phone light close, and the cold went out of him and something else came in. If you are reading this sitting in my seat, then I am gone, and you are the one who found her. I do not know your name, but she is yours now, and I am asking you, whoever you are, do not you dare let them scrap her. Wade read the 3 lines a 4th time, and a 5th, until the phone light dimmed and shut off on its own and left him in the dark holding a book he could no longer see. Do not you dare let them scrap her. He had been told a great many things in his life about what he was worth. He had been told it that very morning, through a pane of glass by a man who counted a cash drawer 3 times a day. And now here was a dead stranger telling him something else, telling him he was the one, handing him a whole airplane in a single hard job. And the strange part, the part that kept Wade awake most of that first night, was that the dead man's version was easier to believe. He slept in the seat with the tarp pulled over him and his father's multi-tool in his fist, and he did not dream. Morning came in gray through the hole in the roof. Wade climbed down stiff and cold, his back a solid ache, and he saw the hangar clearly for the first time in daylight. At the far end, past the shelves and the workbench, there was a room built into the corner, framed up with 2x4s and old plywood, with a door standing open. He had missed it in the dark. He went in. It was where the man had lived. That was plain right away. A narrow cot with an army blanket folded square at the foot, a hot plate on a crate, a percolator, 1 white mug with a chip in the rim, a folding chair, a little cast iron stove with a black pipe running up through the wall, and every flat surface, every inch of the plywood walls, covered in photographs. Wade walked along them slowly. The yellow plane. Over and over. Across the years. In one it sat on green grass with a young man beside it in a leather jacket, grinning, one hand on the propeller. In another it stood in snow, up to its wheel pants. In a third, a woman leaned against the wing, laughing at whoever held the camera, her hair tied back with a scarf. She was in a lot of them, that woman, and then, past a certain row, she was in none. On a shelf above the cot sat a wooden box and a folded flag in a triangle case, and a stack of mail bound with a rubber band gone brittle. Wade slid the top envelope out. It was addressed, in a printed government hand, to Mr. Hollis Renner at the airfield, and it had never been opened. Hollis Renner. The man had a name now. There was a certificate in a dime store frame on the wall by the door, and Wade leaned close to read it in the poor light. It was from the state, and it thanked Hollis Renner for 3 decades of volunteer service to the county's emergency response, and it was signed by a governor Wade had never heard of. Below it, tacked to the plywood with a roofing nail, was a newspaper photograph so old it had gone the color of weak tea, the same yellow plane, and a headline Wade could just make out, "The Flying Good Samaritan of the county still answers the call." At 78. Wade stood in that little room a long while. He had walked in the day before and bought a building for the price of a tank of gas. He understood now that he had bought a man's whole life, and that nobody had come for it, and that the county had been about to bulldoze it flat with all of this still hanging on the walls. He was hungry, and out of water in the truck, and down to $45. He locked the man door behind him with the twine-looped key and drove back toward town. There was a diner where the county road met the highway, a long, low place with a gravel lot full of pickups and one cattle hauler. Wade had passed it 100 times. He had never once had the money to stop. He counted his cash again in the lot, told himself coffee and toast and nothing else, and went in. It was warm inside and smelled like bacon and burnt sugar. A woman in her 60s worked the griddle behind the counter, broad and quick, her gray hair pinned up under a hairnet, a pencil behind one ear. She looked up when the bell over the door rang. "Sit anywhere, hun. Coffee? Please." Wade took a stool at the counter, away from the truckers in the booths. She turned his mug over and filled it without being asked. She had a name tag that said Verna, and she looked at him the same second longer that the woman at the auction had, taking in the duffel he had carried in, because he could not lock the truck. The same clothes he had slept in. "You want food or just the coffee?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Just coffee's fine." Verna set a plate of toast in front of him anyway, and then, after a beat, eggs. "Kitchen made too much," she said, which was a lie, and both of them knew it, and she said it in a flat, friendly voice that did not leave room to argue. "Nobody in this town starves while I've got a griddle. Eat." Wade ate. He had not known how hungry he was until the food was in front of him, and he had to slow himself down. Verna wiped the counter nearby and did not watch him too closely, which was its own kindness. "You're not from here," she said. "I'm from here. Sort of. I lived out on the Malloy place." He watched her face for whether the name Malloy meant anything, and it did. A small tightening she covered fast. Garrett was known, then. "I'm staying out at the old airfield now. The hangar. I bought it yesterday." Verna stopped wiping. "You bought the old airfield hangar." $15. He almost smiled. Nobody else wanted it. She set the rag down. Down the counter, a man in a feed store cap lowered his newspaper. "You bought Hollis Renner's hangar," Verna said. Quiet, and it was not the same as what Wade had said. It carried more. "You knew him." Everybody over the age of 40 in this county knew Hollis Renner. Verna leaned her hip against the counter. "Or knew somebody he pulled out of a bad spot. That man flew my sister's boy to the burn unit in Omaha in a thunderstorm the year the bridge washed out and the ambulance couldn't get across. Didn't ask a dime. Wouldn't take one when it was offered. Either, nobody could ever pay Hollis. It made some folks crazy." She shook her head slowly. "And you're telling me they sold his place for $15? The county did. Back taxes. It's condemned." Wade turned the mug in his hands. "There's a plane still inside it. An old yellow one." Verna's eyes changed. The man with the newspaper had put it all the way down now. "Junie's still in there." Verna said, almost to herself, "Lord, I figured they hauled her off long ago." Down the counter, the man in the feed store cap folded his newspaper all the way shut. "Renner flew my daddy out of the cornfield in 1979, he said, not really to anybody. Combine rolled and pinned his legs. No ambulance was getting down those roads before he bled out. Hollis set that little airplane down between the pivot and the fence line, loaded him in, and had him on a surgeon's table inside the hour. My dad walked me down the aisle at my wedding on those legs." He looked at Wade for a moment. "There's a lot of us walking around this county on account of that plane, son. You mind how you treat her." Verna looked at Wade like she was seeing him properly for the first time. You leave that airplane right where it is. You hear me? You call Dutch Halverson. You got a pen?" She wrote a number on the back of a receipt in a big looping hand before Wade could answer, and pushed it across the counter, and would not take his money for the food, and told him to come back when he was hungry, which she seemed to assume would be soon. He drove back out the county road with the taste of coffee still in his mouth and a strange ache under his ribs. He had grown up in a house where love was a thing you could run short of, where it got measured out and taken back when you crossed somebody. Here was a whole town that had loved one old man so much they could not say his name without their voices going soft. Wade did not know what to do with that. He only knew he was tangled up in it now, this dead stranger and his airplane, and that it was the first thing in a long while that felt like it might be his to keep. At the gate, he stopped the truck and got out and read the notice he had driven past the day before. It was a county form in a plastic sleeve, the ink already going pale. Notice of lease termination and clearance. The airfield parcel would revert to the county, it said. The structures would be removed and the ground graded for a new equipment and storage yard. There was a date at the bottom, and it was 90 days out. 90 days, and then a dozer would go through everything Hollis Renner had built, and everything he had left behind, including a yellow airplane a dead man had asked a stranger not to let them scrap. He did not have to call Dutch Halverson in the end. When Wade came through the gate a little before noon, there was already a truck parked at the hangar, an old green flatbed, and a man standing at the open man door with his hand flat on the steel like someone touching the shoulder of a friend in a hospital bed. He was old, past 70, tall once and now stooped in canvas coveralls and suspenders, with white stubble and grease worked so deep into his knuckles that no amount of scrubbing would ever get it out. He turned when he heard the truck, and he did not look friendly. "This you're doing?" he said before Wade had the door open. "You the one that bought this out from under the county?" "I bought it yesterday. Wade Kessler." Wade put out his hand. The old man did not take it. "Dutch Halverson. And I'll tell you what I already told the girl at the county building every year they put it on that list, which is that this hangar and everything in it ought to have gone to the Historical Society or gone to me, and instead some outfit lets it rot and then sells it too." He stopped. He looked Wade over. "To a kid with a bag. What are you going to do with it, son? Scrap it? There's boys drive around buying up old steel by the pound. That plane's got aluminum and brass in her worth more than what you paid, and if that's your game, you can climb back in your truck." Wade felt the old anger come up, the automatic thing, the thing that had never helped him once. He pushed it down. He reached into the cab of his truck instead, and he brought out the logbook, and he held it so the old man could see it. "I found this in the cockpit," Wade said. "I read most of it last night. I know what he was. I'm not going to scrap anything." He swallowed. He left a note in the back of it. Said, "Don't let them scrap her." "So, I'm not." Dutch Halverson looked at the book for a long moment. Then he took it, careful, in both hands, and opened it, and Wade watched a grief move across the old man's face that he had to look away from, because it was too private to watch. "I taped these covers for him," Dutch said finally. "Rough. 91, 92. Glue let go, and he was going to throw the whole thing out and start fresh. And I told him, 'Hollis, that book is the only church you ever went to. You don't start it fresh.'" He turned a page with one blunt finger. "There. Read that one out loud. Go on." Wade took the book back and found the line under the old man's thumb. "Took the Petrakis girl and her mother to Grand Island. Girl couldn't breathe. Fog on the deck the whole way, flew the road by the lights. No charge." Wade looked up. "There's 1,000 like that." 11,000 hours, Dutch said. "More. Half of them he wrote down, other half he didn't bother. People used to ask him why he never charged. Fuel and a plane and his own 2 hands, folks said. You could make a living. And Hollis would just look at them." The old man's mouth worked. He'd say, "Fuel's cheaper than a funeral. That's all. Fuel's cheaper than a funeral." Then he'd go do it again. The two of them stood in the cold hangar with the dead man's plane between them, and the wariness went out of the air between them. "You got anywhere to be?" Dutch asked. "No way at all." "Then get that tarp off her the rest of the way and let me see what the damp's done." Dutch was already rolling up his sleeves over forearms corded like old rope. They pulled the canvas off together and let it drop in a heap, and Dutch went over the airplane slow, talking half to Wade and half to himself. The fabric was the worst of it. He pushed a thumb against a soft spot on the wing, and it went into the knuckle. "She'll need a whole new skin, top to bottom. That's real work. Real money if you were paying for it, which you're not." He rapped the metal cowl with the flat of his hand, and it rang. "But hear that. Dry in here. Where the roof held, she stayed dry, and dry is the whole ballgame." Wade crouched by the engine and worked the cowling latches without being told. Underneath sat a small four-cylinder gone gray with dust, the spark plug leads cracked but whole. He put his hand on the propeller hub and eased it, and felt the pistons take it. Stiff but turning, no grind, no lock. "She turns," he said. Dutch came around and looked at where Wade's hands were, and did not say anything for a second. "You've had your hands in an engine before." "Since I was 7. My dad's shop, before my mom married Garrett. Then Garrett's, for nothing until this morning." Wade wiped his fingers on his jeans. "Magneto's not a battery. So if the mags are any good and we get clean fuel to it, she could fire without much, couldn't she?" "She could," Dutch said, and there was a new thing in how he said it, close to respect. "Carburetors full of varnish, tanks likely rusted through, brakes will be seized. But you're asking the right questions, which is more than I looked for out of a boy who paid $15 for a headache." He straightened with a hand pressed to his back. "The bones are good. Rust is just iron remembering it used to be useful. Sand it back, and it'll hold." He nodded at the cockpit. "And don't you touch that panel behind the front seat." Wade stopped with his hand on the canvas. "There's a panel back there. I felt it. It's screwed shut. I know it is." Dutch did not look at him. He was running his palm along the split fabric of the wing, reading it like a page. Hollis put that in himself. Must be the winter after June passed. Wouldn't say what was in it. I asked him once, straight out, "What have you got hid in your own airplane?" And he just kept sanding and he said, "It's not for me, Dutch. It's for whoever's next." The wind moved over the broken roof and moaned in the steel. "June," Wade said. The name on the nose. June Renner. His wife. Nurse over at the county hospital 4 decades, which is where he got the taste for it, hauling her patients around when the roads went bad. Dutch's hand stilled on the wing. He painted her name on that cowl the spring they married and touched it up every year after. After she died, he flew harder than ever, like he was trying to catch up to her. The old man cleared his throat hard. Had a boy too. Neil left for the coast the day he turned 18, and I don't believe he came back even to bury his own father. Hollis died right there in that back room on the cot, alone, and the fellow that found him was the meter reader. He finally looked at Wade, and his eyes were wet and furious about it. $15. That's what this county decided all of that was worth. They started the next morning, and they did not stop. Dutch came out every day in the green flatbed, and he brought things. A roll of aircraft fabric he had been keeping in his own barn for a project he would now never finish. Cans of dope and thinner. A come-along. A set of good wrenches. A kerosene heater that turned one corner of the hangar warm enough to work in with bare hands. Wade moved his few things into the back room, out of the truck at last. He slept on the dead man's cot under the dead man's army blanket, and it did not feel wrong. It felt like the first bed that had wanted him in a long time. Word got around like it does in a small place. People started coming out to the field, 1 or 2 at a time, in pickups that idled at the gate while their drivers worked up the nerve. An old woman brought a thermos of soup and would not come inside, only stood looking at the plane through the open door with her hand over her mouth. A man Wade had never met left a case of oil on the step, with no note. A boy of about 12 rode his bike 11 miles from town just to ask if it was true, if the yellow plane was really going to fly again, and Wade said he did not know. But they were going to try, and the boy pedaled all the way home to tell everybody. Wade worked. He stripped the rotted fabric off the wings down to the wood and the metal, sanded the rust off the frame in long, patient strokes, and under his hands the airplane started to come back. Dutch taught him to lay new fabric, to shrink it tight with a hot iron, to brush the dope on in thin, even coats. It was slow and exact, and Wade was good at it, better than Dutch expected, and the old man stopped hiding that he was pleased. One evening, wiping dope from his hands, Wade asked the thing he had been circling for days, "When she's done, who flies her?" Dutch looked at him over the top of his glasses. "That's the question, isn't it? I've never been off the ground in my life." Hollis soloed a boy younger than you once. Kid off a dairy farm, couldn't afford a lesson, so Hollis traded him flight time for barn work. Dutch went back to the wing. "A license costs money you don't have, but I know a retired examiner who owes me more favors than he can count. We'll worry about that when she's ready. First, we make her ready." It was the first time in Wade's life that somebody had said we about his future and meant it. Verna drove out twice a week with foil pans she swore were leftovers and never were. She would set them on the workbench, look the airplane over, tell Wade he was getting too thin and the plane was getting too pretty and the county ought to be ashamed of itself, and then drive back to feed the rest of the town. Wade started to understand that this was how the place worked. Everybody carried a little of everybody else. He had just never lived anywhere that let him. By the 3rd week, the wings had their new skin, taut and pale, waiting for the yellow. Wade rubbed the old paint off a scrap of the cowl, and found June's name underneath in the real color, a yellow like the middle of a fried egg, and he matched it at the paint counter in town from a chip no bigger than his thumbnail. When he brushed the first stroke of it onto the fresh fabric, Dutch stopped working to watch, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying. It was on one of those afternoons, with the light going amber through the open doors, that Alma came. She came in a car driven by a younger woman who stayed behind the wheel. Wade heard the door and turned, and there was a small old woman making her slow way across the concrete with a cane, a scarf tied over white hair, her eyes fixed on the plane and nothing else. She stopped a few feet from the wing and stood there, and her chin trembled, and when she finally spoke her voice was thin but steady. "Hello, Junie," she said to the airplane. Wade set down his brush. Dutch across the hangar went very still. "I'm Wade," he said. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The old woman looked at him. "You're the one who bought her." It was not a question, so he did not answer it. "My name is Alma. I heard the doors were open out here for the first time in a decade, and I told my granddaughter she was driving me out whether she liked it or not." She reached out one spotted hand and laid it flat on the fabric of the wing, careful, as if it might be warm. "I have wanted to touch this airplane for 61 years and never had the courage because I did not think I could do it without falling apart." "Why 61?" Wade asked, quiet. "Because that is how old I am." She kept her hand on the wing. "There was a blizzard the winter I was born, the worst anyone here remembers. I came early and I came wrong, blue and not breathing right, and the doctor in town could do nothing, and the roads were gone, all of them, drifts to the top of the fence posts. My mother was told to say goodbye to me." Alma's eyes were wet, but her voice held. "And Hollis Renner took this airplane up into a sky that had already killed 2 men that week, and he flew me to the children's hospital in the city. And I lived." She patted the wing softly. "He flew through weather that would have kept the angels grounded. For a baby he never met. For me." The hangar was silent except for the wind. Wade found he could not speak. "He never once let me thank him," Alma said. "Every time I tried all my life, he would wave his hand and change the subject. The one time I pushed, he told me the thanks belonged to the airplane, not to him, and that if I truly wanted to pay him back, I should go and be worth the trouble." A small broken laugh. "So I did. A whole lifetime of trying to be worth the trouble. That was the bill he handed me. That was the only bill he ever handed anybody." I want to stop here for a second, because if you have made it this far into Wade's story, you should know that what he does next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. So take a moment and subscribe, and then stay with me, because everything turns from here. Alma stayed almost an hour. She told Wade things about Hollis that were not in any logbook, and before she left, she pressed something into his hand, a small photograph of a baby in a hospital bassinet with a nurse leaning over her, and on the back, in the handwriting Wade now knew as well as his own, it said, "She made it, worth every gallon." When the car finally pulled away down the cracked runway and out the gate, Wade stood holding that photograph, and then he was not all right at all. It came up out of him without warning. All these people, this whole county, carrying one man around inside them like a warm coal. And Wade had grown up 11 miles down the road, in a house where nobody would have crossed the yard for him, let alone the sky. He had a father who died and a mother who looked away, and a man who changed the locks on his birthday. And here he was standing in a saint's house wearing the saint's blanket, taking the love that all these people were bringing out to a field. And none of it, not 1 ounce of it, was actually meant for him. He was a stranger who got lucky with a $15 bid. He was a thief of somebody else's grief. He threw the logbook. He did not decide to. His arm just did it, and the book that a man had guarded for a lifetime sailed across the hangar and hit the far wall and burst its taped spine and rained loose pages across the concrete. All those years of mercy scattered in the dust. Then Wade got in his truck and drove. He drove out the gate and past the diner and past the turn to the Malloy place without slowing, and all the way to the county line, to the green sign at the edge of everything, and he pulled onto the shoulder and put it in park and sat there with the engine running and both hands on the wheel. He had $60, less 15, less a tank of gas. A duffel bag sat behind the seat. He could keep driving and be 3 states away by morning and never think about a dead pilot or a yellow airplane or a town full of people who loved somebody who was not him. Nobody would come after him. Nobody ever had. He sat at that sign for the better part of an hour while the dark came down, and then he turned the truck around, because when he looked back toward town, 11 miles off across the flat black land, there was one small light burning, the hangar light. Dutch had started leaving it on for him every night, without ever saying so, the way you leave a porch light on for somebody you expect home. Wade looked at that light for a long time. Then he drove back toward it, not because he had figured anything out, because he had not, but because it was the only lit window in the world with his name on it. Dutch was still there when he came in. The old man had gathered every loose page off the floor, squared them, and was sitting at the workbench pressing them flat inside the covers under a stack of manuals. He did not look up. "I know," Wade said. His voice was wrecked. "I'm sorry. I don't know what happened." "I do." Dutch kept working. "You met the size of it. Everybody who ever got close to Hollis met the size of it sooner or later, and it about knocks you down." He set another page straight. "It's not a debt, son. That's the thing you're going to have to learn. He didn't do it to be paid back. You can't steal something that was already being given away." The next week, the man from the county came. He came in a clean white truck with a magnetic sign on the door, in a canvas jacket that had never once been worked in. He was polite. The man walked around the hangar with a clipboard and looked at the airplane and said, "Well, isn't that something?" in the voice of a man looking at a problem. Then he explained kindly that the parcel was scheduled for clearance, that the lease Wade had bought was being terminated as provided, and that the county was prepared to offer him a small settlement to release his interest early and save everybody the trouble. "How small?" Wade asked. $1,200. The man smiled. "That's 80 times what you paid, son. You'd walk away well ahead." $1,200 was more money than Wade had ever held. For one ugly second, he felt it pull at him. "There's a plane in here," Wade said. "You know that. Man flew this county's grandparents to the hospital for free his whole life. And you want to run a dozer over his airplane so you can park road graders where it stood." "I want to do my job," the man said, not unkindly, and that was worse than if he had been cruel. "The airplane's yours. Move it wherever you like. But the ground goes back to the county in the spring." He left his card on the workbench and drove away, and the card sat there, and Wade did not touch it. Wade watched the white truck go, and felt the 90 days pressing on him like a hand between the shoulder blades. He did not have $1,200 a fight in him, or a lawyer, or the first idea how a man stops a county from doing what it had already decided to do. He had a half-recovered airplane and an old mechanic with a bad back. It did not seem like enough to stop anything. It was, he was starting to see, about what Hollis had always worked with. A full tank and a bad forecast, and somehow that had been enough more times than the whole county could count. That night his phone lit up on the cot. A text from a number he had deleted, but still knew. "Wade, it's your mother. Please call me. I've been trying." He read it twice. He turned the phone face down on the blanket and lay in the dark listening to the windwork at the roof. And he did not call. He got up before light and went out to the plane and stood looking at the panel behind the front seat. 4 screws. Dutch had told him not to touch it. But Alma had touched the wing after a lifetime of not daring, and the county was going to bury all of it in 90 days. And Wade decided that whatever Hollis had left for whoever came next, the next one was here now, and cold, and out of time. He got a screwdriver. His hands were not steady. Wade had wondered what was behind that panel every night since the first. This was the morning he finally went looking. The screws came out stiff. The panel came away. Behind it, wedged into the space between the seat frame and the fuselage wall, was a flat packet wrapped in oilcloth and tied with wax string, dry as the day it was hidden. Wade carried it to the workbench and cut the string, and inside was a single folded sheet of paper, and Hollis Renner's block printing, and across the top, underlined once, the words, "For whoever keeps her flying." Wade read it standing up, in the gray light, alone. "If you found this, then you sat in my seat, and you did not sell her for scrap the first week, or you would not have bothered taking this panel off. That tells me most of what I need to know about you. I am going to guess some more. I am going to guess you did not have much when you came here. I made sure of that, as best a dying man can arrange anything. I told the county to auction this place cheap, and keep it cheap. No reserve, so that no rich man and no scrapper would ever want it, only somebody who needed a roof bad enough to take a ruined one. June used to say the plane always seemed to find the person who needed her worst. I am betting my whole life she found you." Wade's throat had closed. He kept reading. "I am not leaving you an airplane. Anybody can be handed an airplane. I am leaving you a reason to get up in the morning, which is a harder thing to give and worth more, and which nobody ever handed me. I had to find it in bad weather with a sick child in the back seat. You get to find it easier. Keep her flying and do for somebody what she let me do, and you will understand the rest without me telling you." There was one more line, lower down, in ink that had been pressed harder into the page. "Under the floorboards of the room where I sleep, I left what I could not give my own son. It is yours now, too. I am sorry, Neil. I am sorry to both of you." Dutch's flatbed was pulling through the gate. Wade heard the engine, heard the door, heard the old man's boots on the concrete, and he did not turn around. He stood at the workbench holding the letter in both hands, and when Dutch said, "Easy, son, what have you got there?" Wade read the last of it out loud, his voice cracking on the name of a man he had never met. Under the floorboards of the room where I sleep, Wade read, I left what I could not give my own son. They moved the cot out of the back room, and the folding chair and the little rug worn to string, and there under the rug were the floorboards Hollis meant. 6 of them, cut clean and screwed down, a different wood than the rest of the floor. Wade backed the screws out one at a time, while Dutch held the lamp, and the 2 of them lifted the boards away. Underneath, in the dry crawl space between the floor and the cold earth, sat a gray steel strongbox with a handle on top. Wade lifted it out. It was heavy. He set it on the workbench and worked the latch, and it opened without a key, and the 3 things inside were exactly the kind of things a careful man leaves behind. The first was money, a coffee can full of it, 10s and 20s gone soft and limp from handling, and tucked against the can a savings passbook from the bank in town. Wade opened the passbook and read the last balance and had to sit down on the stool. $9,000 and change. To a boy who had bid his last real cash at 15, it was a fortune, and it was not, he understood at once, the point of the box. He sat with the passbook in his hand and did a bitter piece of arithmetic he could not help. His mother and the man she married had put him out on the road with $60 and called it fair. A stranger who had never met him, dying alone in a cold room, had left him $9,000 and a whole airplane and a written order to spend it doing good. Wade did not know what to do with a world that could be arranged like that. He set the passbook down careful, like it might bruise. A note was rubber banded to the can. Wade read it aloud, because Dutch had gone quiet. For the next one. Get your ticket, a license and a check ride, and enough fuel to be some use to somebody. Do not you dare frame this money or put it in the bank to feel safe. Safe is not what it is for. Burn it up in the sky doing good, and come find me to complain when it runs out. Dutch made a sound that was half a laugh and all grief. The second thing in the box was a folded legal paper, a will, short and plain, and witnessed. Wade read the witness line twice. It was Dutch's name and Dutch's crooked signature at the bottom, dated the winter before Hollis died. He had me sign it at the diner, Dutch said. Wouldn't tell me what it said. Just told me a lawyer wrote it, and he needed a witness who'd outlive him. And I signed, and Verna signed under me, and he bought us pie. The old man's eyes were wet again. It leaves the hangar and the airplane and everything in this box to whoever the county sold this place to, so long as they kept her flying. He set it up so the law would hold, son. He gave her to you before you were ever here. The third thing was the letters. A thick bundle of them, tied with the same waxed string as the panel packet. Every envelope addressed in Hollis's careful hand to Mr. Neil Renner at addresses that changed and got crossed out and rewritten as a man moved around the country running from his father. Some were stamped. None had been mailed. There must have been 40 of them, one for nearly every year the boy had been gone. Wade held the bundle and did not open it. It was not his to open. He knew that as surely as he had known not to sell the plane. In the days that followed, the money did exactly what Hollis had told it to do. Wade drove into town and bought a carburetor kit, a battery he did not strictly need, and 40 gallons of fuel. He and Dutch flushed the rusted tank and hung a clean temporary one, and rebuilt the carburetor on the workbench with the parts laid out on a white rag. On the 4th morning, they were ready to try. Dutch stood at the propeller. Wade sat in the front seat with a checklist the old man had printed for him in block capitals, and his hands were shaking again. And this time it was not from grief. Switches, Dutch called. Off. Fuel. On. They went through it slow. Then Dutch pulled the prop through by hand. Once, twice, and on the 3rd pull the little engine coughed, caught, sputtered, and then it was running, rough and then smoothing out, blue smoke pouring off it and then clearing to nothing. The whole airplane trembled around Wade, alive under his hands for the first time in a decade. He could not hear himself shouting over it, and he did not care. Dutch stood in the prop wash with his white hair blown flat and his face wet and shining, and he was laughing, both fists in the air like his team had scored. She ran for 20 minutes. Every gauge came alive and steadied. When Wade finally shut her down and the quiet came rushing back in, his ears rang, and Dutch put a hand on his shoulder and gripped it hard and said nothing, because anything he could have said would have been smaller than the moment. Wade should have had more time to think about what to do with the letters. He did not get it, because the next afternoon, a car he had never seen turned in off the county road and came up the runway too fast, and a man got out who did not have to say his name. He had Hollis's build and Hollis's jaw, and none of Hollis's ease. 50s, gray at the temples, a good wool coat, and city shoes gone white with runway dust. He stood looking at the hangar, at the open doors, at the yellow airplane sitting in the light, half-painted, and his face tightened, and then closed like a fist. "Where's the paperwork?" He said, before hello, before anything. "For the sale. I want to see it." "You're Neil," Wade said. "I'm his son. which means that airplane and everything in that building is family property. And I don't know who you are or what you think you bought, but you're going to want to talk to me before you touch another bolt." Dutch came out of the hangar wiping his hands. Neil saw him and stopped. "Dutch. Neil." The old man's voice was careful. "You came a long way. You didn't come for the funeral. You didn't come when he was sick and I called you 3 times. Don't." Neil's jaw worked. "You don't get to stand there and—" "I buried your father," Dutch said, not loud. "Me and Verna and about 200 people you never met in a cold rain because his own boy wouldn't answer the phone. So don't you tell me about family property." Neil's eyes had gone back to the airplane while Dutch spoke, and they stayed there. The new fabric drawn drum-tight over the ribs, the yellow coming back panel by panel, hand-brushed matched from a chip no bigger than a thumbnail. June's name half restored on the cowl in the old careful script. Whatever Neil had driven all this way expecting, a scrapper, a con man, a kid stripping a dead stranger's shed for parts, this was not it. Wade watched him see it and watched him hate that he was seeing it, because it is an easier thing to fight a thief than to stand in front of proof that a stranger loved your father better than you managed to. Neil turned away from the old man and rounded on Wade instead, because Wade was easier. "That airplane is worth money. You know that. A restored one of those, the right buyer, that's $50,000, $60,000. You found some kid to do the work for free," he said, waving at Wade. "And you're going to flip it, and I am not going to stand here and watch strangers pick my father's bones." Wade felt the old anger, and this time he let a little of it show, because the man had earned it. "I paid $15 for this hangar and everything in it at a county auction," Wade said. "Steady. The contents transferred with the deed. There's a will in that box that says the same thing, witnessed by 2 people, and one of them is standing right here. I'm not flipping anything. I'm keeping her flying, because that's what he asked in writing 3 different ways." He took a breath. "But you can look at every piece of paper you want. I've got nothing to hide from you. I just need you to stop yelling at the plane. She didn't do anything to you." That last part landed somewhere Neil was not braced for. He stared at Wade, and his mouth opened, and nothing came, and he got back in the car and drove off too fast again, gravel spitting from the tires. "That went well," Wade said. "He'll be back," Dutch said. "That's the trouble with the renters. They always come back to the thing that hurts them. Just takes them a while." The renters were not the only ones. 2 days later, in the last light of the afternoon, a small gray sedan came up the runway slow and stopped a good distance from the hangar, like the driver was not sure of her welcome, which she was not. Wade was up on a stepladder brushing yellow onto the tail when he saw who it was, and his hand stopped in the air. His mother got out of the car. Dana stood by the door with her hands folded in front of her, and she had gotten older in the months since the locked door, older than the time accounted for, and she did not come closer until Wade climbed down and led her. "You're hard to find," she said. "I wasn't hiding. Everybody in the county knows where I am." Wade set the brush across the can. "You could have asked Verna. She'd have told you. She tells everybody everything." "Wade." Dana's chin trembled. "Garrett doesn't know I'm here, I figured." They stood there in the cooling air with the half-yellow airplane between them, and for a while neither of them found the words. Dana looked at the plane, at the hangar, at her son in his stained clothes with paint to his elbows, standing straighter than she had ever seen him stand. "He never took the money," she said finally. "From the register. There wasn't any money missing. Not really. Garrett's shop is going under. Has been for a year. He needed it to be somebody's fault that wasn't his. And you were." Her voice broke. "And I let him. I stood in that hallway and I let him put you out on the street on your birthday. And I told myself you were 19. You'd be fine. Boys land on their feet. I told myself a lot of things so I could keep standing in that hallway." Wade had waited a long time to hear something close to this. He found that having it did not fill the hole he thought it would. It just showed him how big the hole was. "I know it was Garrett," Wade said. "I always knew. That's not the part that—" He stopped. He made himself say the true thing, quiet and without heat, because heat would have let her off easy. "You didn't come to the door, Mom. He changed the locks, but you're the one who didn't come to the door. You didn't lose a son. You gave one away. There's a difference, and you're going to have to carry it." Dana put her hand over her mouth and wept, and Wade did not go to her, and he did not turn away either. He let her cry, which was its own kind of honesty. "I don't know how to fix it," she said. "I don't think you can. Not all the way." Wade looked at the airplane, at the yellow coming back to it stroke by stroke. "But you can come back. Not to move me home. There's no home to move to, and I've got one here anyway. Just, you can keep coming out. See what I'm building. That's a start. That's more than nothing." He picked the brush back up. "It's about all I've got room for right now, honestly." Dana nodded, wiping her face. Before she got in the car, she looked at the plane one more time. Whose is it? A man named Hollis Renner. He's dead. He left it to whoever needed it. Wade almost smiled. Turned out to be me. She drove away slow, and Wade watched the taillights all the way to the gate. And then he did something he had not planned. He went into the back room and picked up the bundle of 40 unsent letters, and he put it on the passenger seat of his truck, and he drove into town to the one motel to find Neil Renner, because he had just learned, standing in his own paint, exactly what an apology is worth that never gets delivered, and he was not going to let another man carry that if he could help it. Neil opened the motel door with the chain on. Through the gap, he looked at Wade like a man expecting a fight. "I'm not here to argue about the plane," Wade said. He held up the bundle. "These were in the box under the floor. Your dad wrote them. One for about every year you were gone. He addressed them to you everywhere you ever lived. He just never mailed a single one." Wade pushed them through the gap. "I read the will. I didn't read these. They're not mine. They're yours. They always were." Neil took the bundle with both hands, holding it like it might go off. The chain was still on the door between them. "Why?" Neil said. "You could have burned these and kept the plane clean of me. Why would you drive them out here?" "Because somebody should have come to the door for me," Wade said, "and nobody did, and I'm not going to be the reason nobody came to yours." He stepped back off the walkway. "Read them or don't. That's your business. Good night, Mr. Renner." Wade did not hear from him for a day. Then, on the evening before the county board was set to meet, the meeting that would decide whether the field got its 90-day dozer or something else, Neil Renner's car came back up the runway, slow this time, headlights sweeping the hangar. Wade and Dutch came out. Neil got out holding one of the letters open, and his hard coastal face had come apart entirely, and he did not try to hide it. "He wrote to me the night I left," Neil said, holding up the page, his voice shaking. 18, and I slammed the door and took the bus, and that same night he sat in that airplane and wrote me a letter he never sent. He looked at the page and read a line off it in a ruined voice. "Anybody can own the sky for a minute. The trick is giving the minute away. I wish I had taught you that instead of just doing it where you couldn't see. I taught it to a whole county and never once to my own boy." Neil lowered the letter. He loved that airplane out loud. Everything else he loved in a whisper. "I spent my whole life only hearing the whisper. Nobody said anything." Somewhere out on the strip, a loose panel ticked in the wind. "The board meets tomorrow," Neil said finally, wiping his face with the back of his hand, looking at the yellow plane like he was seeing it for the first time. 9 o'clock. "And I've got some things to say to them." Wade looked at him, at the letter trembling in his hand, at the tears he was no longer bothering to hide, and Wade could not tell, standing there in the dark, whether Neil Renner had come home to save his father's field or to finally close it for good. Dutch could not tell either. Dutch could not tell either. They watched the car go back down the runway and out the gate, and Wade lay awake most of that night in the dead man's bed, listening to the sky for weather like Hollis used to before a bad night run, and thinking that in the morning a room full of strangers was going to decide whether any of it had meant a thing. The county board met in a low brick building on the town square, in a room built for a dozen people, and a slow afternoon. When Wade walked in at 10 to 9, there was nowhere to sit. The place was full. It was full of people he had come to know, and more he had never met. Farmers and grandmothers, and a man still in his feed store cap, filling the folding chairs and standing along the back wall and out into the hall. Verna was there in a good coat instead of an apron. Dutch had put on a tie that had not been unknotted since a funeral. Alma sat in the front row with her cane between her knees and her granddaughter beside her. And near the door, alone, in the same wool coat, stood Neil Renner, and Wade could not read his face at all. The 3 board members came in and sat behind their long table and looked out at a crowd that had never once shown up for a lease item. And Wade watched them understand that something was different before a word was said. The chair called the item in a dry voice. A county clearance of the airfield parcel out north. Lease terminated. Structures to be removed. Ground to be graded for equipment storage. The man in the clean canvas jacket stood and walked through it with his clipboard. Plainly and reasonably, the cost savings, the liability of a condemned building, the routine of it all. He sat back down. It had taken 4 minutes to propose erasing a man's whole life. "Any public comment?" the chair said, expecting none. Alma stood up. It took her a while, and her granddaughter helped her, and the whole room waited in a silence you could have heard a pin drop into. When she was on her feet, she did not go to the little microphone. She just turned and faced the board and spoke in that thin, steady voice. 61 winters ago there was a blizzard, and I was born too early and too blue, and the roads were gone," Alma said. "The doctor told my mother to say goodbye. Hollis Renner took that yellow airplane up into the same sky that had killed 2 grown men that week, and he flew me to the city, and I am standing in your meeting room because he did. She let that sit. He never charged my family a cent. He never charged anybody. And now you would like to run a grader over his airplane to park your own machines, where it stood. I am 81. I have voted for some of you. I would like to know if that is really who we are. She sat down. Nobody clapped. It was past clapping, then the feed store man stood and told about his father in the cornfield. Then a woman told about a snake bite and a night flight. A man in back said Hollis had flown his wife's insulin over a flooded road twice in one spring and stayed for supper both times and never mentioned it again. One after another they stood, and the board members' faces changed, and the man with the clipboard looked at his shoes. When it went quiet, the chair cleared his throat and looked at Wade, because everyone else had, and Wade realized it was his turn, and he had not written anything down. He stood up. His voice came out rougher than he wanted. I'm the one who bought it, Wade said. $15 at your auction. I didn't know what it was. I was just looking for a roof, because I'd been put out of my house that morning and I didn't have anywhere else. He heard the room take that in. I found his logbook in the airplane, 11,000 hours of flying people to hospitals for free, and I found a note where he asked whoever came next not to let anybody scrap her. So I fixed her. She runs. She'll fly. He made himself keep going. I don't want anything from the county except the ground she's sitting on. I've got the man's own savings, which he left for exactly this, and I've got Dutch, and I've got a whole town that keeps driving out there with soup and oil, and no reason to accept that they loved him. Wade swallowed. I want to keep her flying. Fly for you when the roads go bad and the weather's too low for the medical helicopter, like he used to, and teach it to kids who've got nowhere. Kids like I was 3 months ago. That's all. You don't have to pay for it. You just have to not bulldoze it. The chair was quiet a moment, then he said the thing Wade had been afraid of. And he said it kindly, which was worse. Son, I hear you. This whole room hears you. That the county can't run an airfield on soup and good intentions. There's the lease, the insurance, the upkeep. I'd like to help you. I don't see how the numbers let me. And that was when Neil Renner walked up the center aisle. He went to the front and turned and faced the room, and he was pale and his hands were not steady. And he held up nothing at all this time. My name is Neil Renner, he said. Hollis was my father. The room made a sound, a soft collective intake, and the board chair sat up straight. I left this county when I was 18 and I didn't come back. Not when he got sick. Not when he died. I told myself he never had room for me, that he loved that airplane more than he loved his own boy. Neil's voice shook and he let it. This week a stranger handed me 40 letters my father wrote me over the years I was gone and never mailed, because he didn't think a man like him had the right words. I have read every one. I was wrong about him. He didn't love the plane more than me. He loved everybody, quietly, out loud only in that cockpit, and I was too angry to hear the quiet. He looked at the board. One of those letters says, anybody can own the sky for a minute, the trick is giving the minute away. He gave his whole life away a minute at a time to the people in this room. The least his son can do is give some of it back. He named a number then, an endowment, enough to cover the lease and the insurance and the upkeep for as long as anybody in the room would be alive, on one condition, that the field carry his father's name and stay open to anybody who needed it. It was more money than the county had ever been handed for anything. The room was silent, and then it was not. The board did not have to deliberate long. Bulldozing a dead hero's airplane had been easy arithmetic. Keeping a beloved memorial airfield at no cost to the taxpayer, run by a local boy endowed by the man's own son, was easier. One of the board members, an old rancher who had said almost nothing all meeting, leaned into his microphone before the vote. For the record, he said, I'd have kept it without the money. I just didn't think the county would let me. He looked out at the room. Renner flew my daughter to the burn unit in 1978. I've owed that airplane most of my life and never knew how to pay it back. Glad somebody finally handed me the chance. They voted 3-0. The chair banged his gavel, and this time the room did make noise, and Alma cried, and Verna hugged a stranger, and Dutch stood very still with his funeral tie and his wet eyes and looked at the ceiling. Outside, in the cold sun on the courthouse steps, Neil found Wade. I'm not staying, Neil said. I've got a life on the coast for what it's worth, but I'll fund it and I'll come back for it. First time in my life I've had a reason to. He put out his hand and Wade took it. You gave a dead man's son back his father. I don't know how to pay that. You don't, Wade said. That's the whole thing about it. I'm still learning that part. Neil laughed, short and wet, and gripped his hand harder. He'd have liked you. He'd have made you his. The flying came slower than the saving. Dutch made a call, and a retired examiner drove up from 3 counties south, a lean old man who had known Hollis and owed Dutch favors past counting. and he took Wade on for the price of lunch and hangar talk. Through that winter and into the spring, Wade learned to fly like he learned everything else, with his hands and his stubbornness and long patient hours. And the yellow airplane taught him as much as the men did. On a still morning in May, the examiner climbed out of the back seat on the grass strip and leaned in and said the words Hollis had once said to a boy off a dairy farm, 3 times around the pattern. "Take her up yourself. I'll watch from here." Wade sat alone in the airplane a moment, with the engine idling and his own heartbeat loud in his ears. He thought about the man who had done this 10,000 times into weather that wanted him dead, and about the boy that man had been once, and about how neither of them had ever had a single soul standing in the grass to watch them go up. Wade had that now. He had a whole strip of people who had driven out to watch him leave the ground. Wade taxied out alone. The little engine steadied. He pushed the throttle forward and the tail came up and the wheels left the earth. And the yellow plane climbed into a clean blue morning sky with nobody in it but him. And below him, Dutch and Verna and Alma stood in the grass looking up with their hands shading their eyes, small and getting smaller. And Wade Kessler, who had been thrown away on his birthday with $60 in a duffel bag, flew 3 careful circles over everyone who had chosen to keep him, and came home, and set her down soft on the old cracked runway. When the wheels chirped and rolled out, he heard them before he saw them, the small crowd whooping and clapping in the grass, and Dutch walking out to meet the plane with both arms over his head. Wade brought her to a stop and sat in the cockpit with the engine ticking down, and he put his forehead against the panel and let himself shake. He wrote the flight in the logbook that night, his own hand under a lifetime of another man's. First solo, it said. Then, because it felt true, he added 2 words Hollis would have understood. Worth it. His mother came out that summer, more than once, like he had told her she could. Dana would sit on an upturned crate by the hangar door and watch him work, and they would talk about small things. The weather, the plane, never quite the other. It was not what it had been before, and it was never going to be, and both of them had stopped pretending otherwise, which turned out to be its own kind of peace. She was on her own now. The shop had closed, and the marriage with it, and she did not ask to move in, and Wade did not offer, and neither of them called that cruelty. They called it the truth, and they let it be enough, and slowly it became a little more than enough. The Mercy flights started that autumn, when the river came up over the low roads and a diabetic man out past the flooded bridge ran out of insulin. The medical helicopter was 2 counties away on another call. Wade put the medicine on the seat where 100 sick children had ridden before, and he flew it in low over the brown water with his heart going hard, and he landed on a gravel road and handed it across, and the man's wife tried to give him $40, and Wade heard himself say it before he chose to. "Fuel's cheaper than a funeral," he said. And then he flew home. That night he opened the logbook, Hollis's and now his own, and in the remarks column he wrote the date, and the flooded road, and 2 words he had learned from a man he never met. No charge. It was the first time his own handwriting had looked like it belonged on the page. By the next spring, you would not have known the place for the ruin Wade bought. The dead tree was gone off the roof, and the roof was patched and painted. Someone had cleared and rolled the runway, and beaten the weeds back to the fence line. The big doors slid open now on greased track, and the sign at the gate had been repainted by hand, and it did not say condemned anymore. It carried a man's name and, under it, in smaller letters, the words the county had voted to keep. Open to anybody who needs it. In the back room, Wade still slept on the same cot, under the same blanket, and he had left every one of Hollis Renner's photographs exactly where they hung. There was a boy out at the field most days now. 16. Quiet, too thin. Sent out by Verna, who had a nose for the ones nobody was feeding. His mother's boyfriend had put him out, and he had been sleeping in the back of the truck stop lot, and Wade had found him one morning looking at the airplane through the fence with a hunger Wade knew from the inside. He put the boy to work, sweeping first, then sanding, then the good stuff, the fabric and the dope, and the long patient hours, in trade for flight time when he was ready. The boy did not believe it at first. They never did. "Why are you doing this?" the kid asked him once, wary, waiting for the catch. "You don't even know me." Wade thought about a locked door and a pane of glass. He thought about a stranger's letter behind a panel. He handed the boy a fresh sheet of sandpaper. "Because somebody left me something they didn't have to," Wade said. "And the deal on it was that I pass it on. That's the whole deal. You'll see." The boy went back to sanding, still braced for the catch that had come in every place he had ever been. Wade let him wait for it. It was not going to come, and one of these mornings the kid would notice that it had not come, and that would be the morning that mattered. Wade could be patient about that. He had been waited on once himself by a better man than he had gotten around to being yet, and he had turned out worth the wait. On the good evenings when the work was done and the boy had pedaled off home, Wade would climb into the front seat of the airplane just to sit, like the dead man must have 1,000 times. The leather was new now, but he had kept a patch of the old cracked seat and sewn it in under the cushion. So there was still a little of the man he never met, right there beneath him. Through the windscreen, the last light came down clean. No hole in the roof to let it in anymore. Just the open doors, and the runway, and the enormous sky. He had bought the cheapest thing at that auction. It had turned out to be the only thing in his whole life that ever chose him back. Dutch found him out there, one of those evenings, sitting in the yellow plane in the quiet, and the old man leaned on the wing a while without talking, and then he shook his head. $15, Dutch said. Cheapest fatherhood in the state of Nebraska. Wade laughed, and it carried out across the empty runway and the darkening fields, and somewhere above them the first star came out over a little airplane that would fly again in the morning, given to a thrown-away boy by a man who had spent his whole life proving that nobody is ever really worthless. And nobody is ever really thrown away, so long as one other person is willing to come looking.